When I first started at Ravensdale Consulting, Mark Benton seemed like the kind of boss everyone dreams of having. He was effortlessly charismatic, the type who could walk into a meeting late, apologize once, and somehow still have everyone smiling by the end of it. His shirts were always crisp, his shoes polished, and his confidence filled the room before he even spoke. If there was ever an office version of movie star charm, Mark had it down to a science. In the company's sleek downtown office, he was both admired and envied. Senior partners trusted him completely. Junior staff followed him around, hoping his success would rub off. He remembered birthdays, brought coffee for the interns, and threw casual compliments that made you feel seen. "You've got a sharp eye for numbers, Emily," he told me one morning after my first financial report. "People like you keep this place running." That single sentence made my week. At that time, I worked as an executive assistant in the finance department, a role that mostly meant juggling spreadsheets, travel plans, and last-minute crises. Mark oversaw several large client accounts, including the firm's biggest investor portfolio, so his workload and by extension mine was demanding, but I didn't mind. Mark made everything sound important. He inspired loyalty simply by acting like he already had it. When I joined, the company had been going through what the board called a strategic tightening, which really meant cost-cutting and layoffs, yet Mark seemed immune to the chaos. His teams hit every target, his clients renewed contracts early, and the board credited him for keeping morale high. Around the office, people joked that if Ravensdale ever went under, Mark could still sell sunshine in a thunderstorm. He also had a personal story that made him even more likable. Self-made man narrative everyone admired. He'd grown up, he said, in a working-class neighborhood, paid his way through college, and clawed his way up in corporate finance. He wore his success like a badge of honor but never seemed arrogant. "Hard work doesn't just build a career," he once told the interns during a Friday meeting. "It builds character, and character builds trust." Those words would echo in my head months later when everything fell apart. But in the beginning, there were no cracks to see. If Mark made mistakes, he covered them with charm. If he missed deadlines, he spun a story that made it sound strategic. Even his rare flashes of temper were shrugged off as the pressure of leadership. We believed he cared about the company and about us. One moment in particular stands out from those early months. The firm had just secured a major client, and Mark threw an after-hours celebration in the conference room. He stood at the head of the table, glass raised, and said, "This team makes me proud. You're not just employees, you're the reason Ravensdale keeps climbing." Everyone cheered. The next day, he sent personalized thank you notes to each department. It felt genuine. Looking back, I realize how meticulously he built that image, every gesture designed to reinforce trust. He knew exactly what people needed to hear. To the partners, he was dependable and driven. To his subordinates, approachable and inspiring. To me, he was a mentor figure who saw potential others overlooked. I trusted him completely. So when he first mentioned an upcoming business trip, a few days out of town to meet a potential investor, I didn't think twice. Mark traveled often. It was part of his job. He left his calendar open just enough to seem transparent, but not enough for anyone to question the details. If someone had told me then that this trip would be the thread unraveling everything, I would have laughed. Back then, Mark Benton was still the perfect boss, polished, respected, and untouchable. The idea that he could ever betray the company, or us, seemed impossible. It started with a Monday morning announcement, the kind that usually meant a new deal, a conference, or a reason for Mark to show off his signature grin. But this time, his tone was different. "I'll be heading out of town for a few days," he said, standing at the front of the glass-walled conference room during our weekly meeting. "We've got a potential investor from Denver, big money, serious interest in expanding their portfolio with us. It's sensitive, so I'll handle it personally." He didn't elaborate, and none of us asked for details. That was the thing about Mark. His authority was unquestioned. When he spoke, you just assumed he knew what he was doing. I remember jotting down a note to update the travel itinerary. 3 nights, Denver," he'd said, tapping his phone absently as if already planning his flight. "I'll need the usual booking, first-class flight, Hyatt downtown, client dinner reservation." I confirmed everything that afternoon, emailing him the details. He thanked me with a quick thumbs-up emoji. At the time it seemed routine. Mark traveled often, and these trips were always dressed up with big numbers and bigger promises. But looking back, there were small, almost invisible cracks in the story. For one, he didn't schedule any follow-up meetings for when he'd be gone. Normally, he'd delegate calls, update the client tracker, or at least leave a detailed agenda. This time, he brushed everything aside. "It's a short trip," he said. "You've got it under control, Emily. Just keep an eye on the Northbridge account and handle any incoming calls." That felt odd, not the trust part, but the vagueness. Mark was many things, but vague wasn't one of them. He thrived on precision. Every project had color-coded spreadsheets and neatly labeled folders. Yet this big investor didn't have a name attached, no email trail, no prep deck, just his word. On Wednesday morning, he wheeled a small suitcase through the lobby, chatting casually with the receptionist as he left. "See you all Monday," he said, flashing that effortless smile. "Don't burn the place down without me." And then he was gone. At first, everything went smoothly. The office was calm without him, quiet even. By Thursday, I'd settled into my tasks and barely thought about the trip. That changed in the afternoon when Mr. Carlson, one of our longtime investors, called asking for Mark. "I was supposed to meet him in Denver today," Carlson said, his tone puzzled. "We had lunch scheduled at 2, but he never showed and his phone's off." Did something happen? My stomach sank. I'm sure it's just a mix-up," I said, forcing a polite laugh. "He's probably tied up in another meeting. I'll check in and let you know." After the call, I tried reaching Mark. No response. I texted, emailed, even left a voicemail, but all I got was silence. Later that evening, I received a brief message. "Busy day. All good. We'll explain later." The next morning, he returned as if nothing had happened, cheerful, confident, refreshed. "Trip went great," he said, breezing past my desk. "Investors are excited. Let's discuss Monday." But something about him seemed off. Maybe it was the faint cologne of expensive whiskey clinging to his jacket. Maybe it was the fact that he never mentioned the investor's name again. That Monday, I caught him shredding a stack of papers in his office. When he saw me, he smiled too quickly. "Old drafts," he said. "No need to clutter the files." Still, I didn't question him. Mark Benton was the golden man of Ravensdale, the one everyone trusted without hesitation. So I convinced myself it was fine. That Carlson must have been mistaken. That Mark knew what he was doing, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. And in the weeks to come, that tiny doubt would grow into something much larger, something that would expose the $210,000 secret he'd worked so hard to hide. The following week started like any other: emails, budgets, and the endless hum of office chatter. Mark was back from his Denver trip, full of vague stories about high-stakes meetings and new opportunities. He'd stride through the halls with a spark in his eye, as if he'd just sealed the deal of the year. But what caught my attention was how careful he was with his words. Big potential, he'd say when someone asked how the trip went. Still in negotiation when the partners pressed for names. And always too early to discuss specifics. Normally, Mark would have flooded the office with updates and PowerPoints. He loved the spotlight. But this time, there was no presentation, no client dossier, not even a single new contact in the CRM system. I noticed it, but I told myself not to overthink. Maybe confidentiality was part of the deal. Maybe the client requested privacy. That illusion shattered 2 days later. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when my desk phone rang. The caller ID displayed Carlson Group, one of our long-term investors. Mr. Carlson rarely called directly. He preferred formal channels. So I picked up immediately. "Good afternoon. Ravensdale Consulting. This is Emily speaking." "Emily." "Glad I reached you," came his voice, tight with confusion. "I'm just trying to confirm, what exactly happened in Denver last week?" I froze. "I'm sorry." "With Mark," he said, irritation creeping into his tone. "He was supposed to meet me and my associates at the Hilton downtown. We'd arranged a lunch meeting, discussed over email last month. But he never showed. I tried calling, texting, nothing. His assistant said he was in Denver, but I'm starting to think he wasn't. I felt my pulse quicken. You mean, you didn't meet at all? Not even close, Carlson said. And now he's billing our department for client dinners and meeting accommodations? I just want to know what's going on. I assured him I'd look into it immediately and hung up. My fingers trembling slightly. Mark had told me he was meeting Carlson in Denver. He'd even used that as the reason for traveling in the first place. But if Carlson hadn't seen him, if there was no meeting, then where had Mark really gone? I opened the expense folder from his trip and scanned through the receipts. Hyatt Regency, Denver, room service charges. 2 dinners, each tagged client entertainment. Everything looked legitimate, maybe too legitimate. Every itemized receipt was printed, not emailed. None had the usual digital verification marks. When Mark walked past my desk later, I looked up, studying him differently this time. He was calm, smiling, phone in hand. "All good, Emily?" he asked, pausing for a moment. "Yes," I said quickly. "Just clearing up some billing confusion. Mr. Carlson called. He mentioned not connecting with you in Denver." For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his eyes. A split second of alarm, then gone. "Oh, that miscommunication," he said smoothly. "His flight got delayed. I had to meet another contact instead. Nothing to worry about." He delivered the line with such confidence that, for a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. But that night, as I reviewed the travel logs, I noticed another inconsistency: his return flight. The company's system showed a departure from Phoenix, not Denver. I double-checked the booking confirmation I'd made earlier. Denver, Hyatt, 3 nights. Why Phoenix? The question kept me awake longer than I wanted to admit. The next morning, Mark arrived with his usual confidence, joking with staff, praising my reports. But all I could see were the gaps, the missing meeting, the false receipts, the unexplained change in his itinerary. For the first time, I saw past the charm. Mark wasn't just secretive. He was hiding something, and though I didn't know it yet, that missed meeting wasn't an accident. It was the first undeniable sign that the man everyone trusted had been lying, not just about a trip, but about something much, much bigger. A week after the missed meeting fiasco, the Denver trip faded quietly into the background, at least for everyone else. Mark had brushed off Mr. Carlson's complaints with a convincing apology and an even more convincing explanation about crossed schedules and investor mix-ups. The board bought it. The partners moved on, but I processed the company's travel reimbursements as part of my finance duties, and that meant every receipt, invoice, and report eventually crossed my desk. Usually, Mark's reports were meticulous, color-coded, clearly labeled, organized by category. But the Denver file felt different, for starters. The hotel invoice had been scanned and printed, not emailed directly from the Hyatt like usual. The signature at the bottom marks was slightly smudged, like it had been added later. The room service totals were oddly round, every charge ending in .00. And then there were the dinners, 2 client meals, totaling over $3,000 in just 3 nights. Something wasn't right. At first, I thought maybe it was just human error, maybe the receipts were duplicates, or the wrong file had been uploaded. So I did what any diligent employee would. I cross-referenced the dates, checking them against Mark's corporate credit card statements. That's when the real problem appeared. The charges didn't match the receipts. The hotel claimed he checked out of Denver, but the card showed transactions in Phoenix restaurant bills, bar tabs, and a luxury car rental. The timing overlapped exactly with his supposed investor meetings. It didn't make sense. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he'd extended his trip. Maybe there was a flight delay. But Mark never mentioned any of that. And the company hadn't approved a car rental. I printed the statements, slipping them into a plain folder, my hands slightly shaking. The numbers told a story, and it wasn't the one Mark had sold us. That afternoon he appeared at my desk, cheerful as ever. "Expense report ready?" "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "Just finalizing the entries." He leaned casually against the desk, scanning my screen. "You're a lifesaver, Emily. I swear I'd drown in paperwork without you." I nodded, pretending to type something. My throat felt dry. When he left, I stared after him, his easy confidence, the way he smoothed his tie, the faint scent of expensive cologne trailing behind. How could someone who looked so in control be lying so completely? Over the next few days, I began noticing more irregularities, not just in the Denver trip, but in older reports too. Every quarter had a few $1,000s in vague charges. Consulting expenses, client gifts, vendor entertainment. None of them had corresponding documentation. I dug deeper one late night. After most of the office had cleared out, I pulled up the expense archives from the past year. It was like peeling back wallpaper to find rot underneath. Trip after trip, the same pattern emerged: fake meetings, inflated meal costs, ghost vendors, and suspiciously similar handwriting on multiple receipts. By midnight, I had calculated over $40,000 in questionable expenses. Just from the last 6 months, I sat there in silence, my desk lamp casting a pale cone of light across the paperwork. The realization was suffocating. If I was right, this wasn't a mistake, it was fraud. Systematic, deliberate, and cleverly hidden. But then came the harder question. What was I supposed to do with this? Reporting Mark wasn't just risky, it could blow back on me. He was trusted by the board, protected by senior leadership. One word against him could easily be twisted into misunderstanding. Still, something in me refused to let it go. I had built my career on integrity, and I couldn't pretend not to see what was staring me in the face. So I made a quiet decision. I'd keep watching, collecting, verifying. If Mark was hiding something bigger, I was going to find it. And as it turned out, I wouldn't have to wait long. The next trip he took would uncover everything he'd worked so hard to conceal. Once you notice one lie, it's impossible not to see the next. After the Denver trip, I couldn't unsee the inconsistencies in Mark's expense files. What used to feel like routine admin work now felt like decoding a mystery, one buried beneath spreadsheets and polished smiles. I told myself I was only reviewing things for accuracy, but deep down, I knew what I was really doing, investigating my boss. Every time I opened a past report, another oddity appeared. Invoices without vendor names, receipts without tax details, hotel stays that didn't align with flight bookings. It was subtle, like he'd gone out of his way to make each lie small enough to blend into the noise of a busy company. But when I started compiling everything into a single spreadsheet, the picture became impossible to ignore. It wasn't a few mistakes. It was a pattern over the past year. Mark had filed 9 business trips to different cities: Chicago, Seattle, Miami, Boston. Every single one had the same red flags: cash transactions, vague meeting notes, and reimbursements that exceeded normal limits. Worse, when I compared those dates with the firm's official client calendar, half of the clients he claimed to meet didn't exist. It was like watching the illusion of his career unravel line by line. Still, I needed more than suspicion. If I went to the board or the CFO without proof, Mark would find a way to spin it. He always did. He could turn a crisis into a communication error with a smile. And a few confident words. So I started digging deeper. Quietly. I stayed late under the pretense of catching up on reports. I cross-checked receipts with our vendor directory, even called a few hotels to verify stays. Most confirmed his name on record, but 2 didn't. In one case, a hotel in Boston said, "Sorry, no reservation under that name during that week." Yet the company reimbursed him for that stay, nearly $4,200 that night. Sitting alone in the office, I realized something chilling. These weren't just accounting errors. They were fabrications, and they added up to more money than I wanted to believe possible. By the end of the week, I'd tallied a total of $210,000 in suspicious reimbursements over 15 months. Every trip, every fabricated dinner, every vendor who didn't exist, it all formed a trail of deception. But one question gnawed at me. Where was the money going? If Mark was faking receipts, he had to be cashing out somewhere. So I followed the paper trail. I checked our vendor payment accounts, and that's when I found something that made my stomach turn. 3 of the vendors he'd billed, the ones supposedly providing consulting services, had nearly identical payment details. Different names, same bank account prefix. That was no coincidence. I wasn't an accountant by training. But I knew what embezzlement looked like when I saw it that night. As the city lights flickered through the office windows, I sat in silence, the hum of the printer the only sound in the room. I had the evidence, or at least the beginnings of it, but the fear came next. If Mark realized I was onto him, he could ruin my career. He had influence, charm, and a spotless reputation. I was just his assistant, the person who booked his flights and processed his receipts. Who would they believe? Still, something in me refused to back down. I thought about Mr. Carlson, about the board members who trusted him, about every hard-working employee he was quietly stealing from. Mark Benton wasn't the golden boss anymore. He was a fraud hiding behind an expensive suit, and, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. So I made a plan, one careful step at a time. I'd wait for his next trip. I'd watch, document, and prove it. He'd already lied once. And when he lied again, I'd be ready. Once you start doubting someone, it's like living in two worlds, one where everything looks normal, and another where you're waiting for the mask to slip. That was how it felt working with Mark after I uncovered his suspicious expenses. He still walked into the office every morning like nothing had changed, greeting everyone with his easy grin, complimenting presentations, cracking jokes in meetings. To everyone else, he was still the company's golden boy. To me, he was a ticking bomb. I didn't confront him right away. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. Numbers could be explained away, spreadsheets could be spun, but evidence? Evidence was permanent. And then, almost as if fate wanted to help me, Mark announced another business trip. Quick one, he said one Thursday morning, leaning on my desk. Some potential clients from out of state want to meet over the weekend. I'll be gone Friday through Sunday. Keep things steady while I'm out, yeah? He said it casually like it was routine. But something about his tone set my nerves on edge. I asked, which city this time? Palm Springs, he said smoothly. Conference resort? You'd like it sun, golf, the works? Palm Springs. A 3-hour drive away. Close enough to verify. That night, after everyone left, I checked his travel documents. No conference registration. No client itinerary. Just a vague note, private investor discussion. And the hotel booking? It wasn't under the company's travel portal. He'd booked it personally. My gut told me this was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. So I made a decision that scared me as much as it thrilled me. I followed him. Saturday morning, I drove out early, heart racing the entire time. I told myself I just wanted to see if he was actually at the resort he'd claimed. I wasn't planning to confront him, just to observe, confirm, and collect proof. But deep down, I knew I was crossing a line I could never uncross. The Palm Springs resort was stunning white stone buildings, wrapped around sparkling pools and palm-lined paths. It was the kind of place corporate retreats and luxury affairs happened. I parked a few lots away, keeping my sunglasses low and my camera phone ready. And then I saw him. Mark, standing by the pool bar in casual clothes, drink in hand, laughing. Not with clients, not with colleagues, but with a woman. She was younger, elegant, dressed for leisure, not business. They looked comfortable, familiar. He leaned close, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and kissed her. My chest tightened. I snapped a few photos discreetly, hands trembling. I didn't care about his personal life, but this wasn't a harmless affair. It was proof that his business trips were lies. Every falsified expense, every client dinner, every missing receipt, it all made sense now. He wasn't meeting investors. He was living a double life on the company's dime for an hour. I watched from a distance as they ordered lunch, laughed, and strolled through the resort grounds like a couple on vacation. Then I saw him pull out his phone company phone and take photos of the resort signage, the dining area, even the conference hall entrance. I realized with a sickening clarity that he was gathering fake evidence for his report. That was my breaking point. I drove home that evening in silence, the desert sun sinking behind me, my mind racing. I finally had what I needed: photographic proof that his business trips were a facade. But the weight of it settled hard in my chest. Mark wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing trust. From the company, from the people who believed in him, From me. I knew what I had to do next, but exposing a man like Mark Benton wouldn't be simple. It would take precision, timing, and courage, three things I'd spent my entire career learning, quietly in his shadow the next time he walked through those glass doors. Smiling like he owned the world, I was going to start taking it apart, piece by piece. The Monday after Palm Springs felt different. Mark strolled into the office with that same confident swagger, whistling softly, a tan on his face, a to-go coffee in his hand. Palm Springs was productive, he announced to no one in particular. Lots of great leads. We'll see some movement soon. Everyone nodded, impressed. Everyone except me. I kept my expression neutral, fingers tapping on my keyboard, pretending to be busy with reports. Inside, though, my mind was a storm. I had seen him. I had pictures. And now, every word out of his mouth felt like poison, but I couldn't rush. If I accused him without concrete evidence, digital proof, financial records, he'd deny everything. Worse, he could make it look like I had crossed ethical lines. Mark was clever, connected, and trusted. I was careful, but I wasn't untouchable. So I did what I did best. I observed quietly, and I documented everything. That week, I started digging deeper into the company's internal systems. As Mark's assistant, I had limited but legitimate access to travel and expense databases. What I didn't have access to were the vendor payment files until I noticed something unusual. 3 vendor names kept appearing in Mark's reimbursement logs: Havenstone Consulting, Blue Ridge Strategies, and Larkhill Enterprises. They were listed as advisory partners, supposedly providing client introductions and analysis services. But I'd never heard of them before. And their listed emails didn't match our usual vendor format. So, during lunch breaks and after hours, I searched. The first red flag hit instantly. None of these companies had real websites. Just placeholder pages with stock photos and vague descriptions like providing tailored investment insights for forward-thinking firms, the kind of generic text you'd use to look legitimate without actually being so. The second red flag was worse. When I checked the invoice numbers attached to Mark's expense reports, I realized every single invoice from these vendors had the exact same formatting, identical fonts, layouts, and even typos. He wasn't just fabricating expenses. He was creating entire fake companies. I saved everything: screenshots, invoice PDFs, email threads. I even traced the bank routing numbers listed on the invoices. And that's when the truth hit me like a brick. All 3 accounts had the same first 4 digits, the same bank branch. That kind of coincidence doesn't happen by accident, but it wasn't enough. I needed a direct link to Mark. So I dug through archived company emails. He was careful. He deleted anything sensitive from his main inbox, but our IT system automatically stored server copies for compliance. I searched through thousands of messages, narrowing them by file size, date, and attachments, hours blurred together until, finally, I found it. An old email thread, dated nearly a year ago, between Mark's company account and one of the fake vendors. The sender's address? markbenton.consult@outlook.com. Not his official work email, his personal one. The message was short, but damning. Invoice looks good. Send it in by Friday. Use the same format as before. That was it. The smoking gun? I remember staring at the screen, the office lights humming quietly above me. It was one thing to suspect your boss of fraud. It was another to see his fingerprints on every part of it. My stomach turned, but my resolve hardened. I gathered every file, every receipt, every shred of proof, and stored copies on an encrypted drive. Then I printed one clean set and sealed it in an envelope labeled confidential. That night, as I walked out of the empty office, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For months, Mark had been lying, manipulating, and taking what wasn't his, but the trail he'd left behind was now in my hands, and soon, the truth would no longer be his secret to control. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been a lost cause. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same email, used the same format as before. Those 6 words had burned themselves into my mind. Proof of fraud, written by Mark himself. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping bitter coffee, the envelope of evidence lying in front of me. I'd read and reread every page until I could practically recite the dates and figures by heart. $210,000, that was the total now, stolen in careful increments. Disguised as professionalism. It was time to tell someone, but who? The partners adored Mark. The CEO was his golfing buddy. HR couldn't handle a case this big, and going to the wrong person could backfire fast. If Mark found out I was the one digging through his files, I'd be finished. Then I thought of David Keller, our chief financial officer. He was quiet, methodical, and brutally fair, the kind of man who never raised his voice but could spot a discrepancy from a mile away. More importantly, he respected data. Not politics. Not charm. Facts. That was who I needed. By 8:30 a.m., I was standing outside his office, envelope clutched so tightly my knuckles had gone white. "Emily," he said, looking up from a spreadsheet when I entered. "Something on your mind?" "Yes," I said, voice trembling just slightly. "I think I've found something. Irregular in Mr. Benton's expense reports." His brows furrowed, but he gestured for me to sit. "Show me." I opened the envelope and began laying everything out. Copies of receipts, side-by-side invoices, and the email from Mark's personal account. David studied each document in silence, his pen tapping lightly against his desk. When he reached the email, he froze. His eyes flicked up to me, sharp and questioning. "You're certain about this?" "Yes, sir," I said quietly. "I verified every number, every transaction. The vendor accounts are fake. The routing numbers match. It's been happening for at least 15 months. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. $210,000, he murmured. "He's been running a ghost vendor scheme under our noses." There was no anger in his voice, just controlled disbelief. For a long moment he said nothing, then finally spoke. "You understand the gravity of what you're bringing me. Emily, if this goes to the board, there will be an internal investigation. You could be called in? Are you ready for that?" I hesitated only for a second. "Yes, someone has to stop him." He nodded once, a small gesture of respect. Then he began gathering the documents. "Leave these with me. Don't mention this to anyone. Not even casually. I'll handle it from here." As I left his office, my heart felt lighter and heavier at the same time. The truth was finally in motion, but the waiting, the not knowing what would come next, was unbearable. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the office began to shift subtly. David requested quiet access to finance records. IT started auditing email accounts. Compliance officers began scheduling routine data reviews. No one said Mark's name aloud, but I could feel the tension building beneath the surface. Mark, oblivious as ever, went about his days like a man untouchable until one afternoon. I passed the conference room and saw him sitting across from David through the glass. I watched David slide a folder across the table. Mark's smile faltered for the first time since I'd known him. He leaned forward, saying something fast, defensive. David remained calm, arms folded. Their meeting lasted nearly an hour. When Mark emerged, his face was pale, his jaw tight. For the first time, the charming confidence was gone. He didn't look at me as he walked past. That night, David called me into his office again. "We've confirmed everything," he said simply. "Bank transfers, fake vendors, falsified receipts." "You were right." I swallowed hard. "What happens now?" He looked out the window for a long moment before replying. "Now we take it to the board." The morning of the board meeting felt different, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. The entire office buzzed with nervous energy. Everyone knew the executive team was meeting behind closed doors, but no one knew why. Rumors had started circulating: a financial review, policy discrepancies, audit follow-ups. Only a few of us knew the truth. Mark, as usual, looked calm. Too calm, he strolled into the office in a tailored navy suit, smiling, greeting people by name. His easy charm had always been his armor, and he wore it perfectly that morning. But when I looked closely, I could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the sleepless nights, the cracks beginning to show. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. I wasn't supposed to be there. But David had requested I stay nearby in case supporting documents were needed. So I waited just outside the glass-walled conference room, the hum of conversation muffled by the door from where I sat. I could see through the blinds, 12 board members seated around the long oak table. David at one end, Mark at the other. At first, it looked like every other meeting, graphs, reports, polite smiles. Then I saw David slide a familiar folder across the table. The folder? The one containing the evidence I'd collected. Mark glanced at it, his smile faltering. He tried to maintain composure, but I could see his hand tighten around his pen. David began speaking, gesturing calmly toward the documents. Even without hearing the words, I could read the story in the room. The board members leaned in, brows furrowing. One whispered something to another. The CEO's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to anger. Mark spoke next, his gestures sharper, his voice rising just enough for the glass to vibrate faintly. He was defending himself, spinning, rationalizing. I knew that tone. It was the same one he used whenever he was cornered in smaller meetings. Smooth, persuasive, dangerous, but this time it didn't work. David stood, opening another folder, the email. I saw him tap the printout, then look directly at Mark. Mark froze. His shoulders stiffened. The silence inside that room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then I saw it, the moment the facade broke. His expression changed from denial to panic. He tried to speak again, but no one was listening. The CAO leaned back slowly, arms crossed, and said something final. One by one, the board members began to close their folders. It was over. When the meeting adjourned, the door opened. The executives filed out in silence, their faces pale and grim. Mark followed a few steps behind, his eyes downcast, his confident stride gone. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. Security met him near the elevators, a quiet, discreet escort. He didn't fight. He didn't look back. Just handed over his ID badge and walked out. The office fell into stunned silence. No one said a word for hours. Whispers came later, fragments of truth mixed with disbelief. Fraud investigation, a police involvement, company funds. That afternoon, David came to my desk. His tone was calm but heavy. It's official. Mark Benton has been terminated for financial misconduct. The board's preparing legal action. I nodded, unable to find words. He gave me a rare, faint smile. You did the right thing, Emily. This company owes you more than you know. When he left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at my screen. Relief mixed with sadness, anger with pity. Mark had built his empire on lies, but part of me still remembered the man who once said, "Hard work builds trust." In the end, that was the most painful part, realizing that trust was the very thing he'd destroyed. The week after Mark's termination was eerily quiet. His name vanished from the company directory overnight. His framed photo, the one of him shaking hands with the CEO at a charity gala, was quietly taken down from the executive wall. Even his office was emptied within hours, replaced with an impersonal "under review" sign on the door, but his presence lingered everywhere I went. I heard his ghost in conversations, a whisper in the break room, a half-finished sentence by the elevators. People spoke about him in low tones, as if he might somehow still be listening. For years, he'd been a pillar of the company, respected, envied, even admired. Watching that image collapse in real time was surreal. The charm, the ambition, the polished leadership speeches, it all dissolved into something hollow and sad. I tried to move on, to focus on my work, but every spreadsheet, every expense report I opened reminded me of what I'd uncovered. I'd caught a thief, yes, but I'd also exposed the cracks in a system that had trusted him blindly. A few days later, David called me into his office. He was standing by the window, a soft autumn light spilling across his desk. "Emily," he began, "the board has concluded its internal audit. Your findings were not only accurate, they prevented further loss. You probably saved this company from collapse." I blinked, unsure what to say. He handed me a letter. "We're promoting you to Financial Compliance Officer. Effective immediately. Congratulations." I stared at the letter, my name printed neatly under the company's letterhead. The promotion should have felt triumphant, and in a way it did. But beneath the pride, there was a quiet exhaustion. a deep understanding of how fragile integrity could be. "Thank you," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "You earned it." Over the next few weeks, things began to settle. New policies were introduced, stricter vendor verification, dual approval systems for reimbursements, and quarterly audits. The leadership team held a town hall, promising transparency and accountability. They called it a new chapter. But for me, the chapter didn't close so easily. One evening, long after everyone had gone home, I found myself walking past Mark's old office. The lights were off, the desk empty, but a faint outline remained on the carpet where his chair had once sat. A small, gray square of untouched space. I thought about all the moments that had led to this, the fake trip, the invoices, the lies wrapped in professionalism. It wasn't just greed that destroyed him. It was arrogance. The belief that he was too clever to be caught, too valuable to be questioned. That night, I slipped the last copy of the evidence folder into a locked cabinet marked "Case Closed." But before I turned off the lights, I looked at it one more time, not as proof of what he did, but as a reminder of what I'd learned. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel heroic. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it costs you peace, but it gives you something stronger in return, clarity. The next morning, when I walked into the office, I noticed something small but meaningful. The atmosphere had shifted, lighter, calmer. People smiled more. There was laughter in the break room again. The fear that had lingered under Mark's leadership was gone. For the first time in months, I felt like my company, was finally breathing again. As I sat at my new desk, a line from one of Mark's old motivational speeches came back to me. "Integrity is what you do when no one's watching." The irony wasn't lost on me, but this time, as I looked out at the morning light spilling over the office floor, I whispered it again, not as his lesson, but as mine. And for the first time, it felt true.